As its invasion of Ukraine enters its fourth year, Russia launches its biggest drone attack on Ukraine yet, while President Zelensky makes a plea for peace. In Taiwan, the local Polish representative office marks the third anniversary of the Ukraine war with a focus on the civilians who have been affected.
Saw and experience more violence that person can experience in several lifetimes.
A shared struggle. Demonstrators gather in Taipei to protest Russian aggression in Ukraine. Plus, on the eve of a new legislative session, the biggest question for lawmakers is, can Taiwan's two largest parties get along without fighting? A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Liao. On the third anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he will resign if there is peace and if his country is admitted into NATO. Meanwhile, Russia has used the eve of the anniversary to launch its biggest drone attack on Ukraine since the war began. Rosie Greninger reports.
Smoke rises from Ukrainian capital Kyiv after an unprecedented Russian drone attack in a continued campaign to, as they put it, denazify Ukraine. A total of 267 drones were launched, raining down explosives across the country on the eve of the third anniversary of Moscow's full-scale invasion. With millions of people displaced and tens of thousands killed in the three-year conflict, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made an offer for peace.
Якщо мир для України, якщо вам дуже потрібно, щоб я залишив свій пост, я готовий. Друга історія, можу поміняти це на НАТО. Якщо є такі умови, одразу, щоб довго про це не говорити.
Zelensky's comments came as US support for Ukraine dwindles under new President Donald Trump, who has falsely accused Zelensky of starting the war and labelled him a dictator without elections. That's despite the Ukrainian leader being democratically elected in 2019 and Ukrainian law prohibiting elections during periods of martial law, which the country has been under since Russia began its invasion in 2022. Trump has also been pressuring his Ukrainian counterpart to return money he says the US has spent on Ukraine's war effort. The US president claims the previous Biden administration spent $500 billion on Ukraine's defense against Russia and wants access to rare earth minerals in return. Zelensky said while a deal with the US is moving forward, the US contributed a much lower figure of $100 billion, and he did not recognize the wartime aid as borrowed.
Я домовлявся з Байденом і домовлявся з Конгресом Сполучених Штатів Америки. Я вдячен Конгресу. Це була присутність двох партій і підтримка грантів. Грант – то не є борг, і ми не потрібні віддавати борг.
Meanwhile, Washington is advancing Ukraine negotiations with Moscow after Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed with Trump to begin peace talks in Saudi Arabia last week. Neither Ukraine nor Europe were invited to the table. The Kremlin says another round of talks will take place in the coming days. It's unclear if Ukraine will be involved this time, but both Ukraine and European allies have made clear no deal for lasting peace can be made without the involvement of Kyiv.
Peace only comes through strength. Nobody wants the bloodshed to continue. Nobody, least of all the Ukrainians. But after everything that they have suffered, after everything that they have fought for, there can be no discussion about Ukraine without Ukraine, and the people of Ukraine must have a long-term secure future.
And that's what Ukrainians say they've longed for since the Russian invasion, a return to normalcy and peace.
По-перше, це прокинутися без повітряних тривог, що всі мої друзі повернуться з фронту додому, що на територіях України не буде окупаційного режиму, і ми повернемося до кордонів, які записані в Конституції України.
Вже 3 роки ми в таких умовах живемо, і інколи, коли задумуюся, здається, що війна ніколи не закінчиться. Дуже хочеться, щоб війна закінчилась, щоб настав мир, спокій, тиша.
On the 24th of February 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered thousands of troops to invade Ukraine, as the country sought to gain membership to the NATO military alliance. Military analysts expected Moscow to quickly seize control of Kyiv, but the Ukrainian president remained defiant, implementing a general mobilization, and the country was supported by US funding. But with a dramatic shift in US policy, now open to direct dialogue with Moscow after years of silence and threatening to cut funding, Ukrainians feel betrayed, holding protests in capital cities across the globe.
Algo hace porque como venido ahora nuevo presidente de Trump quiere cambiar todo. Antes Estados Unidos apoyaba a nosotros y ahora dar la espalda.
European leaders are scrambling to show their support for the embattled country, aiming to visit Zelensky in Kyiv this week to discuss the security of Europe and Ukraine without US support. But as their leader continues to search for a path towards peace, Ukrainians take a moment to mourn all they've lost as they mark another milestone in this devastating war. James Lin and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
More than 100 people gathered in central Taipei to condemn Russia's invasion and show solidarity with Ukrainians. As Rick Liao reports, Taiwanese have come to strongly identify with Ukraine's struggle over the last 3 years of war.
Standing shoulder to shoulder, Taiwanese join Ukrainians in protest outside Moscow's de facto embassy in Taipei. 3 years into Russia's full-scale invasion and as US support for Ukraine wavers, Taiwanese here say Ukraine's fight for freedom resonates with their own battle to fend off threats from neighbouring China, which claims Taiwan as part of its territory.
Because we share the same fate, because we are all under the same military threat by the authoritarian powers. I think we are the fortress of democracy. We must stay strong together.
因为他们的处境会让我们也担心台湾。那原先一直觉得说，如果欧洲跟美国都能够联手支持乌克兰的话，觉得这个国家应该未来的状况是可以乐观。 但现在看起来又好像不是这样子。
Taiwan has come to see its fate inextricably linked to Ukraine, knowing that a win for Vladimir Putin in Europe would send a clear message to Chinese President Xi Jinping and his ambitions to take Taiwan. The government and people of Taiwan have sent millions of US dollars in aid to Ukraine. And more than a dozen volunteer Taiwanese soldiers have taken up arms to fight alongside Ukrainians, with 2 giving their lives. But now that Kyiv is unsure it can depend on the United States under President Donald Trump, Ukrainians say friendly democracies must do more to support its struggle, calling on high-technology hub Taiwan to make sure its wares are not used against Ukraine.
Taiwanese microchips sensitive technology, which is used in Russian weapons, for example, in glide bombs, still coming to Russia. So Taiwan and other democracies, they can help by strengthening their export controls and improving their sanction policy in order to prevent Russia and Russian partners, Iran and North Korea, getting the technology for their weapons.
Many here in Taiwan have been watching in horror as Trump pulls the rug out from under Ukraine, withdrawing military aid and dramatically switching US allegiances towards authoritarian Russia. Taiwan too relies on US support. The weapons it supplies helps to counter the China threat. And Trump has also accused Taiwan of taking the protection it offers for granted. Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te recently committed to another boost in defense spending, seen as a move to placate Trump.
Lai is trying to show himself and Taiwan as serious about Taiwan's defense, about willing to help out U.S. industry, and what he's trying to avoid is this image that he is a free rider on the U.S. and that the U.S. Is just, giving Taiwan benefits without anything returned.
Though he has only been in office a few weeks, Trump has turned the international order on its head. His handling of Ukraine has left that nation scrambling and fractured Europe-US relations. Here in Taiwan, a delicate status quo with China across the strait keeps a fragile peace. But the war in Ukraine has revealed the harsh realities that peace is not guaranteed, and neither is support from more powerful allies. Joseph Wu and Rick Liao for TaiwanPlus.
The Polish office in Taipei, the country's unofficial embassy, also hosted a memorial event to mark the 3rd anniversary of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. The event sought to demonstrate Europe's commitment to Ukraine and highlight the war's impact on civilians. Chris Gordon was there and brings us this report.
The plight of Ukrainian civilians caught in the Russian invasion. That was the focus of a memorial event here in Taipei, hosted by Poland's unofficial embassy, marking 3 years since the start of that invasion. Ukraine still does not have a representative office in Taiwan, and Taiwan's diplomatic efforts in the country are often carried out in conjunction with Poland, Ukraine's neighbor to the west. In the past, that has included millions of US dollars in aid for refugees and rebuilding schools and hospitals. The event included statements of solidarity from Polish and European Union diplomats, as well as the personal story of a Ukrainian activist.
Saw and experience more violence that person can experience in several lifetimes. This was Russians who shot people on the street, who abducted them to the basement for torture. And despite that fact that we don't have official relationships or state-to-state communication with Taiwan, I want to assure you that we have been working on it as a civil society.
The event also included a screening of the Polish film Humans, which depicts the stories of 5 civilians affected by the Ukraine war. As some of Ukraine's allies seem to waver in their support for the country's defense, speakers here aim to show that at least for Europe and Taiwan, the country's troubles are still top of mind. Eason Chun and Chris Gorin for TaiwanPlus.
President Lai Ching-te has met with families of victims of Taiwan's 228 incident who live overseas.
现在所享受的民主，并非理所当然，而是我们的祖辈用血泪一滴一滴争取来的。
The 228 incident was an anti-government uprising that resulted in a violent crackdown nearly 80 years ago. At the meeting, Lai reaffirmed the government's commitment to justice and national unity, saying its efforts were in part to ensure such tragedies will not happen again. The leader of Germany's opposition conservative alliance, Friedrich Merz, has declared victory in the country's elections. The results also show a doubling in support for the hard-right alternative for Germany. Louise Watt reports.
Germany's opposition Christian Democrats celebrate their win in the country's elections. Now the biggest party in parliament, with around 30% of seats, putting their leader, millionaire Friedrich Merz, a former corporate lawyer, on track to be chancellor. He's now focused on creating a strong coalition government.
Denn, liebe Freundinnen und Freunde, die Welt da draußen wartet nicht auf uns. Und sie wartet auch nicht auf langatmige Koalitionsgespräche und Verhandlungen. Wir müssen jetzt wieder schnell handlungsfähig werden, damit wir im Inneren das Richtige tun können, dass wir in Europa wieder präsent sind, dass auf der Welt wahrgenommen wird, Deutschland wird wieder zuverlässig regiert. Und da
Even before the election, Merz ruled out working with the far-right Alternative for Germany party, which is projected to come second, winning around 20% of seats, its best ever result. Anti-immigration, it did well among younger and working-class voters, fueling its hopes of one day entering Germany's government.
Und ich muss eins sagen, unsere Hand wird immer ausgestreckt sein für eine Regierungsbeteiligung, den Willen des Volkes, den Willen Deutschlands umzusetzen. Wir sind bereit für eine Regierungsbeteiligung.
But many other parties have a policy not to cooperate with the far right because of Germany's Nazi past. Outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz lamented the AfD's success. His own centre-left Social Democrats pushed to third place, its worst post-war result.
Wir leben in einem demokratischen Land und wir kämpfen um die Demokratie, die SPD mit ihrer langen Geschichte wie keine andere Partei in diesem Land. Und deshalb will ich für mich auch klar feststellen, dass in diesem Land eine extrem rechte Partei wie die AfD solche Wahlergebnisse bekommt. Das darf niemals etwas sein, mit dem wir uns abfinden werden. Ich werde mich damit nicht und niemals abfinden.
Scholz called this snap election after his coalition fell apart because of infighting over how to get Germany's lackluster economy going again. That's just one challenge for Merz and his future government. He says Europe must become independent from the United States, which is now talking directly with Russia over Ukraine and telling its European allies they must take care of their own security. Merz spent 2 decades out of politics and has never held a government leadership post. But his supporters are hoping his time serving on corporate boards will help him to revive Germany's economy and steer Europe through a time of geopolitical change. Chris Ma and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up after the break, we bring you an in-depth look at one of Taiwan's oldest and tastiest cultural traditions.
Game on! Taiwan's national team takes the field, ready to conquer the World Baseball Classic qualifiers. Meanwhile, CPBL spring training is in full swing, with teams gearing up for an electrifying season. On the court, the stakes are higher than ever as basketball heads into its dramatic final stages. Athletes across the island are prepared to give their all in 2025. This is the moment. Game on, Taiwan.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Taiwan's ruling and main opposition parties are gearing up for a new legislative session. On everyone's mind is a new rule aimed at stopping the frequent outbursts of violence on the floor. John Van Triest reports.
Taiwan President Lai Ching-te poses with lawmakers from his Democratic Progressive Party at a Sunday barbecue. Spirits are high, but this event is as much about business as socializing. The legislature returns from recess Tuesday, and the start of a new session is sure to see partisan strife flare up again in the bitterly divided chamber. Members of the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, reportedly discussed livelihoods, the economy, and national security. Yet what went unsaid may speak louder. The DPP and its chief opposition rival, the Kuomintang, or KMT, are openly threatening each other's lawmakers with mass recall campaigns. But DPP insiders say bread and butter issues were the main focus at the barbecue.
他没有提到罢免的议题，我们反而是非常严肃的看待新开展的会期，所以我们对于国会的运作比较多的探讨。
The KMT is taking its prep work for the new session seriously too. Party lawmakers are gathering for a strategy meeting, with major targets on issues like long-term care for senior citizens and others who need it, and restoring several national holidays to the calendar.
明天国民党智库以及国民党党团会来召开会议，一起针对这个会期我们要推出的优先法案做意见的交换。
There's one particular change the KMT wants to make that could impact how the legislature runs and what kind of conduct is expected for lawmakers. Taiwan's politics are deeply polarized, and on the legislature floor, bitter divisions show themselves in heated shouting matches and more. Barricades of office chairs, destruction of legislature property, and even physical violence are not uncommon. The KMT says it wants to rein this in by making people who cause the destruction liable for damages.
去年的2个会期民进党好像跟立法院的门有仇、窗有仇、麦克风有仇、设备有仇，我特别提案修法。
But the DPP says decorum is a two-way street.
国民党之前破坏国父遗照，在国会议场内丢猪肉、内脏等，都是违法的行为。不要自己定的规定，自己又做不到哦。
Whether the idea of holding lawmakers liable for damage makes it through, the coming session looks set to see the same partisan tensions that hit the last one. Already, signature-gathering campaigns to unseat lawmakers of all stripes are underway, and other splits over constitutional changes are far from healing.
think we can expect more partisanship in the legislature. I think the fundamental issues of contention are resolved with regards to recalls, the budget, or the attempt by the KMT to freeze the Constitutional Court. But the attempt by the KMT is to frame the DPP as willing to resort to physical violence to block anything. And we've also seen repeated clashes in the last legislative session, but that's not exactly new. But I don't think it'll deter things either, having cash penalties, for example, for breaking things. I mean, this has happened many times before.
So even if legislative goals move on, the angry tone of past sessions is unlikely to subside in the new one. Alex Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Roadside banquets are an important part of Taiwanese food culture and have been around for centuries. Cadence Quaranto brings us a look at the hours of preparation, coordination, and teamwork that go into putting on one of these huge meals.
Before sunrise in New Taipei, inside tents set up on the side of a road, a kitchen is already bustling. Roadside banquets, or facto in Taiwanese Daigi, are held to gather communities together for big events or celebrations over a large feast of traditional Taiwanese dishes.
办桌是一种台湾的文化嘛。以前你看，我们那个生日结婚了生小孩满月买新房子、新居落成嘛，也要办桌。
Roadside banquets are also held for a god's birthday, or business get-togethers, or even funerals, virtually any occasion. Leading banquet preparations is always a master chef, or zongposai in Taiwanese Daigi.
蒸下去有没有？然后再收回来，再画过来，然后再生。
Lin Mingcan, or Shi, as people call him, has held these kinds of banquets for over 40 years and is well known in Taiwan. He learned from his father, who has been hailed as the patriarch of Taiwanese roadside banquets. One of Shi's first early morning tasks, carving edible flowers used to decorate tables and plates.
你这个越薄，它第一层越薄，它越容易开了。如果要用2次的话，隔天还要用，你就要切厚一点。
为什么？
才不会烂掉啊！以前我爸爸就说，没有 cake 巴拉，不是办桌了，没有雕那个玫瑰花就不像办桌。最快的时候，一朵那个玫瑰花，我45秒就好了呢。现在是眼睛看不到，要凭感觉呢。
This banquet has a particularly special mission to help spread Taiwanese roadside banquet culture to the U.S. Tony Tung, who grew up in Taiwan and now runs a Taiwanese restaurant in California, organized this banquet in the hopes of learning how Shi makes some of the most traditional Taiwanese dishes and taking what she's learned back to the U.S. to make for her own customers. She also hopes seeing videos of today's banquet will help her U.S. customers learn more about roadside banquet culture as a whole.
这也是台湾所谓的 fine dining， 在马路上面办宴席，厨房设定在马路边，他们一点也没有不高级，他们反而非常在意如何干净的处理所有的食材，然后如何把所有的东西很 organized 很整洁的，然后把每一个东西都做完。
回家不要了，这样太细了。你15碗有了。
Many aspects of roadside banquets have roots in history. The earliest banquet appeared centuries ago, while Taiwan was ruled by China's Qing dynasty. During that time, many people from China's southeast coastal provinces moved over to Taiwan, and roadside banquets became an important way for them to form communities, according to an expert specializing in Taiwanese culinary history. Eventually, the style of banquet was embraced across Taiwan, becoming especially popular from around the 1980s to early 1990s. Banquets changed over time. In the early days, a master chef would often show up with only his tools. Other people in a village or community would bring the ingredients, tables, and chairs, and everyone would pitch in to help prepare, even the kids.
所以它很重要的一点就是说，它不只是一起吃饭而已，它是从无到有的一个过程，就是整个 村子或者是整个家族宗族的人，他都变成是一个团队，然后是一个工作团队。那所以他们会一起来筹备这样的一个板德，然后在一起享用。
As time went on, things became more organized, with professional banquet teams taking over preparations and dishes planned out in advance. Often served, a soup called Buddha Jumps Over the Wall. Some explain the name with a story of a Buddhist monk who, while meditating, smelled a soup so delicious that he jumped over a wall to find it.
佛跳墙这道也是非常非常经典的一个老牌菜，对，那里面光食材就有不下10-20种。
This complicated dish and the 11 other traditional Taiwanese dishes on the menu are made simultaneously, a massive feat of coordination and teamwork.
对我来讲，那个是非常很像魔术师。我觉得他们哇，鱼啊菜在那里，怎么经过几个小时，然后那个菜就这么美的端在桌上，而且这么好吃。
Soon, around 8 hours later, lunch is served.
So I'm eating this Fo Tiao Qiang, or Buddha Jumps Over the Wall, right now. It's really, really delicious. And even though these banquets are a traditional part of Taiwanese food culture, they're dying out. This is something we'll cover in the second part of this report.
Hank Xu, Ryan Wu, Eric Tsai, and Cadence Quaranta for TaiwanPlus.
Stay tuned to TaiwanPlus for part 2 of this special report on Taiwan's roadside banquets. And thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Before we go, let's head to Rio de Janeiro for a pre-carnival celebration filled with music, dance, and vibrant costumes. I'm Liao. Take care and see you next time.